When you make a successful television show, someone's always going to want to get a piece of that money pie, either by getting international distribution rights, or in this case, if you think your audience won't like the existing product, by making an entirely new version of the show to try and emulate the success of the original. In this video, I'll be talking about and giving my thoughts on the leaked pilot episode for an American version of Peep Show that surfaced a few years ago in all its low-quality VHS rip glory. Firstly, yes, if you didn't know that this existed, it does. A pilot for an Americanized version of Peep Show was filmed in 2005, and as you can probably guess by the fact that an American version of Peep Show does not exist, or at least not yet anyway, it did not lead to a full series. In fact, the pilot has been pretty much universally panned by those that have seen it and has gained a sort of embarrassing infamy amongst fans of Peep Show. But is that infamy deserved? Is the American Peep Show pilot from 2005 really as bad as they say it is? Well, yeah, spoilers. It is. And it's easy to just say this is shit and move on with your life, as is probably the best thing to do, but as is usual on my channel, I want to go unnecessarily in depth and properly look at why this pilot doesn't work in my opinion, but if anything else does stand out as being okay, I'll make sure to point those things out too. Now of course, all the thoughts are my opinions, but I guess I should note that I don't really watch any American TV comedies at all. Obviously I've seen some, but I pretty much exclusively watch British comedies, so we'll be looking at this pilot from the perspective of a fan of British comedy. On the one hand, some may see that as productive, seeing as this is a pilot specifically made for an American audience, but on the other hand, I see it as a valid take. It's a reimagining of a British show, with the same name as the original show, with the same basic premise as the original show, and two very similar lead characters, on paper at least. Thus, I think it's fair to judge this from the perspective of a fan of the original show. If you want your show to be Peep Show, you can't get away from the fact that people are going to compare it to Peep Show. The pilot is on YouTube if you feel like watching it before watching this video, but anyway, let's begin. Right from the get-go, before I even get into anything else, there is an obvious big change from the original here. The show is not filmed with a POV style. That's right. The main big standout element of the original, its unique filming style, is completely absent in a show that bears the same name, so Peep Show is not really peeping into anything. I mean, we still have the audible internal thoughts, but as we don't have the POV camera, you get these weird shots where we're just kind of staring at the character as they're thinking, which is kind of off-putting.
What's up, Billy Idol? Yeah.
You don't feel like you're on board with Mark and Jez like you do in the original. There isn't that connection gained from looking through their eyes, which is a major shortcoming in a show like this. If you don't feel like the way Mark and Jez are portrayed is genuine and reliable, the entire premise of the show falls flat. So yes, no POV camera. Well, I say no POV. There are like two shots that are done in POV. This one of Mark using the TV remote, and this one of him running to the stationery cupboard at JLB. Oh, not JLB, I mean RMFFA. Were those stylistic choices Easter eggs? Who knows? Honestly, not having Peep Show's unique filming style makes you wonder why exactly they even bothered calling it Peep Show. If you had to state one part of Peep Show that gave it its individuality and identity, you'd obviously say the filming style. It's what makes it stand out from almost everything else on TV and makes the show visually interesting. But then, to drop that whole idea to instead have the show be filmed like any other sitcom, it feels like a blatant misunderstanding of what made Peep Show what it is and why the whole package works so well. Maybe that'll be a running theme for this pilot.
The answer's yes.
Obviously our characters are a bit different because there's no David Mitchell or Robert Webb obviously. Those two are so great together because not only do they have so much natural chemistry, but the characters of Mark and Jeremy were specifically written with them in mind. Sam Bain and Jesse Armstrong designed Mark and Jez around David and Rob, so every little thing about them fits the actors so well. Here, Jeremy is played by Josh Myers and Mark is played by Johnny Galecki.
Hopefully you remember that.
I didn't recognise either of these guys and they didn't seem to have been in anything notable prior to this pilot, but after it, Josh Myers was apparently in Bruno and That 70s Show, and Johnny Galecki became a main cast member of The Big Bang Theory, so make of that what you want. I'll start with Jeremy, who is, for no reason whatsoever, apparently called Jeremy Osborne instead of Jeremy Usborne like he is in the original. He's somewhat like the Jez we know, I guess. He's lazy, has no job, wants to be a musician, and even seems to have Jeremy's vast collection of t-shirts, but the way he's played is completely different. He's a lot more loud and boisterous than Jez, and has this weird kind of macho man attitude around him.
Then bring it.
I think the latter is down to the casting, which I think was really poor here. This guy is tall, kind of muscly, and is a good looking guy, and it really clashes with the failed loser musician role that Jeremy is supposed to be occupying. Robert Webb is kind of scrawny, and while he definitely can scrub up well, I would say as Jeremy is pretty average looking, but this guy looks like, as we're talking about something American, a jock. I don't buy that American Jeremy with his styled, slick-back hair would be in the situation that Jez finds himself in. But outside of looks, this Jeremy just kind of annoys me. He's really exaggerated and loud in a way that doesn't come across as endearing like British Jez. I've done it! Always giving these completely over-the-top facial expressions and saying dialogue that's just clunky and terrible.
You're a worker bee, a drone, whereas I am a dragonfly. I fly around.
He's not funny by himself, and he's certainly not funny around Mark. Speaking of Mark, he just doesn't work at all for me. I think he's the standout failure in this pilot. They try to have him retain the socially awkward and low in confidence side of the Mark Corrigan we know, yet at the same time he's just so fucking loud and obnoxious all the time, just like the American Jeremy.
The women are always doing this, and I won't oh, it is. It's enough numbers.
Constantly shouting, constantly smirking and being wacky, constantly making conversation with people. I honestly don't even know how this could happen. It's like two completely separate characters in one man's body. His behaviour and dialogue are just so inconsistent. They want him to seem a bit nerdy and quiet, yet he's kinda loud and brash.
Maybe I'm gonna have to let my fist do the talking.
He's socially awkward and shy, yet makes small talk with everyone he comes into contact with.
Good morning, Aaron. Mr. Burton. Jonesy.
His thoughts would indicate that he thinks a lot about his actions, yet he just seems to have no filter and blurts out whatever he's thinking all the time.
Sophie!
He's a complete mess, to put it bluntly, and really is nothing like David Mitchell's Mark Corrigan, even though that's obviously what they're trying to do with him. There are three other main characters to note here, those being their neighbour Marsha, who is the equivalent of Tony, Jonesy, who is the American Jeff, and Sophie, who is funnily enough the American Sophie, but I'll get to them as I go through the episode.
Hey. You want to talk about it?
The basic outline of the story here is as follows. Mark and Jeremy meet their neighbour Marsha for the first time. Both of them are attracted to her and try and impress her, and they both fail. Jez thinks he's made a hit track, and Mark meets Sophie on the bus and gets his hand stuck under her. Mark wants Jez to get a job so he can pay rent, and then Jez gets roped into Marsha's pyramid scheme. Mark goes to work and responds to Sophie's flirty cartoon with Nazi love thanks to Jeremy's help, then embarrasses himself on the phone to her by singing a song. The guys drown their sorrows by drinking in the bathroom. Jeremy intentionally fails at getting a job at a supermarket. Mark also gets roped into the pyramid scheme, then the pair of them try their luck at pulling Marsha again. Cue ending music, which is inexplicably Dean Martin's Ain't That a Kick in the Head. As you might be able to tell, it's basically an amalgamation of various elements from the first two episodes of Peep Show. From Warring Factions, we've got the bus scene, Mark and Jeremy both trying to get with their neighbour and Jeremy dancing to his track. And from the interview, we've got Jeremy failing to get a job, Mark getting embarrassed by singing a song, the guys drinking in the bathroom, and the pyramid scheme. Obviously there's dialogue differences and a few changes, but for the most part it really does feel like what it is. A bunch of different ideas all lazily stuck together. My issue here isn't really that they reuse the ideas, it's Peep Show at the end of the day. Those ideas work well in the British version, there's no specific reason why they wouldn't work in an American context, but my problem is that they all come too fast. The episode's pacing is relentless, it barely lets one idea finish before shoving us straight into the next one, and it really doesn't work, especially not in a pilot episode. There's just way too much clutter here. It's like they've seen the brilliance of Peep Show and decided that they want all the payoff with none of the setup. There's a reason why the actual version of Peep Show didn't have all of these elements in a single episode, because it doesn't work. Did husband and wife writing duo Jeff and Jackie Filgo think that they were one-upping Sam Bain and Jesse Armstrong here or something? Were they trying to flex their writing skills by cramming 2 episodes into one? Whatever the reason was, they fucked it up badly, that's for sure. An example of them completely fucking something up is the interview scene in the American pilot where Jeremy intentionally fails at getting a job at a supermarket. In the original series of Peep Show, this idea had an entire episode dedicated to it. In fact, the episode is literally called The Interview because it's such an important part. Yet here in the American pilot, the entire sequence in which Jez finds out about the interview and then does it is completed in barely a single minute, which is just utterly ridiculous. Jez sees a sign saying cashiers wanted, immediately cut to the interview and have 45 seconds of dialogue, end scene.
Man, that sounded awesome.
That's it. It's mind-blowing that someone thought this was a good way to do this interaction. It's like the writers thought that the thing that made the entire interview plot funny was the moment where Jeremy does his facial spasming in the original show, and that everything else was irrelevant and was just in service of that one moment. So they wanted to rush in, make Jez pull a funny face and then leave as soon as possible afterwards. We got it wrong, guys. The interview in Peep Show works so well because not only does Mark want Jez to get a job, but he also puts his own reputation on the line to do so. He gets him an interview at JLB where he works, and so if Jez looks bad, it makes him look bad too. So Mark is doubly invested in said interview, and thus when Jez fucks it up, it isn't just him pulling a weird face and attempting pyramid selling, but he's also making Mark look like a weirdo, because who'd want to hang around with this guy? There is absolutely none of that in the American version. It turns a well thought out, episode-long job hunting plot thread into a kids' TV show level moment of wacky hijinks that gets wheeled out for an attempt at a cheap laugh. The time spent on scenes is put in all the wrong places, so much just needs to be cut out to allow for the events of the episode to have more room to breathe. But these structural issues don't just ruin the pacing of the show, they also destroy moments of awkward humour, aka the thing that the show revolves around.
What is important is that you got it. Because you understand subtlety.
Take for example the Sophie sitting on Mark's hand moment from the original Peep Show episode. It's so awkward because it's a long scene that gets right up close on Mark's face, and so we have to watch him squirm and think to himself about what to do. Then Sophie realises and we have to watch him sit in silence getting the book off. A classic Peep Show scene of uninterrupted social awkwardness that not only has the characters feeling awkward, but you as a viewer too. Now we take this American version of the scene, which is the same interaction, but instead of holding onto the shot and basking in the awkwardness, it just abruptly cuts away to Jeremy flailing his arms around in his bedroom 3 separate times.
Sorry.
I know how fucking stupid that looks, but I can honestly assure you I'm not joking. This is actually how it's edited. The purpose of this scene is to get Mark into an extremely uncomfortable situation that he can't leave because he's on a bus. So why in the fuck are you cutting away from it? You've just defeated the entire point of your own setup because we don't get the awkwardness. We instead get a completely unrelated, entirely tonally different shot instead. It's like cutting to a funny cat video in the middle of Schindler's List. It just ruins the entire atmosphere. Look, I'm certainly not a director or anything, nor do I claim to have any good filmmaking skills, but this is just a baffling moment for me and just cements how poorly put together this pilot is. The same can also be said for the voiceover lines, which are one of, if not the most important parts of Peep Show and are completely misused in this pilot. In the real show, they serve as a way of expanding on our characters' thoughts that we'd normally never get to hear. They show their true personalities internally, and thus by hearing Mark and Jeremy's thoughts, we get a deeper understanding of who they are and why they act like they do. Here, they mostly exist as a means of reinforcing the dialogue we just heard or an event we just saw happen.
And, sometimes long...
He interrupted me. This will not stand.
Yeah!
Like, did you think that the viewers were so stupid that they couldn't understand what just happened there? Mark interrupts Jeremy, who doesn't want to be interrupted. Wow, what a complex and hard to read interaction. Better have Jeremy literally state exactly what happened and give his feelings directly afterwards. Also, just as a comment about that line in general, I can't be the only one that thinks that's some awful line delivery, right?
He interrupted me. This will not stand.
Yeah!
It's so unnatural and clunky. To be honest, the same can be said for most of the dialogue in the pilot. Conversations rarely come across as natural or genuine like they do in the original. You know what also doesn't come across as genuine here? The sets. Everything is just so fucking big. Now I'm aware of this being a common trope in American TV, where you'll have a bunch of poorly paid young people living in a city who will inexplicably own a huge open plan apartment that'll be way out of their price point in reality. But in this pilot, it's just so obvious and impossible to ignore that it completely detracts from the point the show is trying to make. Take a look at Jeremy's bedroom in the original Peep Show. It's a tiny, almost claustrophobic box room that's cluttered with junk and a few musical related things. It's like a child's bedroom, and really indicative of where he's at in his life. He's an adult man, and all he has to show for this is this tiny, cramped, half-painted box room full of junk. Now take a look at the American Jeremy's room. It's a massive, wide and bright room filled with keyboards, decks, mixing boards and an audio rack. Like, look at this shot here. How wide is this room? We can't even see his bed. How much further does it go on? This doesn't look like the room of a failed man-child musician stuck in a rut in his life. It just makes you not buy his character at all. The original Peep Show's flat was inherently grounded in reality, as the first 2 series generally were shot inside of an actual flat in the building that is shown in the establishing shots. They kinda needed to do this, because with the POV style you couldn't use a standard TV show set, as half the time the characters would be looking offset, so to speak. But because there's no POV here, they took the lazy way out and just made a vaguely similar looking flat for Mark and Jez that doesn't really fit with the way they're trying to be portrayed. Same with the kitchen. It's just so big that a shot like this was possible. You know, maybe this is just a cultural thing and that an American audience wouldn't see anything inherently wrong with having a huge set for the flat, but for me it just doesn't work at all.
We're doing all right. We're doing awesome.
Something that stands out as very different in this American pilot is the constant use of jingles, musical stings, and just audio in general. In the original series of Peep Show, aside from the little pip pop plop excerpts that are played during establishing shots and transitions, all of the rest of the music we hear is diegetic and in-universe, so to speak. Like, the only reason we are hearing a song being played is because the characters are actually listening to that song in the show. In this American version, that is not the case. These little jingles and stings are played constantly throughout and are honestly completely distracting. They're really wacky and jovial in a way that doesn't really fit with the overall tone of Peep Show, which is a show about two weird guys whose lives are wasting away from them. You'll have a scene that's supposed to culminate in an awkward moment for Mark, yet it's got this stupid music playing in the background, eliminating any awkward silence. This shit sounds like circus clown music or a 5-year-old hitting a keyboard or something. It's just terrible. They are played so relentlessly throughout, it's almost like the director was afraid of creating awkwardness and so felt the need to fill scenes out with pointless, terrible noise to distract you from what's actually going on. Then we've obviously got some more characters that I haven't really spoken about yet. This is the American Sophie. Her casting is quite peculiar. As with Mark and Jez, they've quite obviously tried to copy David and Rob's look, but with Sophie, she bears no resemblance to Olivia Colman at all. I'm not against that or anything, I just wonder why they felt the need to do it with her and not with anyone else. I can't say I dislike her in this version really. She doesn't really do much or get much screen time, but from what we can see I guess she's fine. Sophie as a character only really starts getting properly explored a few episodes into Peep Show, so I'm not really surprised nothing really sticks out about her in this pilot. Jonesy, is this guy. I'd call him actor man, you know, if they needed the most standard looking man for a movie in Hollywood, they'd cast this guy. That's a bit different from the Jeff that we know, who has his Scouse accent and slightly devious antagonistic charm about him. This guy has basically no standout features at all, other than that he's an above average looking guy and is stated to have hooked up with this character in the past. Again, like Sophie, I have almost nothing to say about him, he doesn't really do much here. Though I would have been interested to see how his character would play out in the long run, as I don't really see him fitting the standard Jeff role, and so I'd be interested to know just how that would have affected the plot of the show further down the line. Then the last main character to talk about is Sasha, the American Tony. She's the character with the most screen time outside of Mark and Jeremy obviously, just like Tony is in the first episode of Peep Show. The thing is that Elizabeth Marmer, who played Tony, did such a good job with her that any attempt to try and recreate the character was never going to be able to live up to what she did. Sasha doesn't convey the same level of weirdness and eccentricity that Tony did. I think partially that's down to looks. Like look at the way Tony looks in dresses, remember that weird purple kimono thing she wore before? She looks quirky and a bit eccentric, so any weirdness we get from her feels totally in character. But with Sasha, they try to play the same weirdness, but she just looks too normal for it to work. A combination of the way her dialogue comes across like it's trying way too hard to be quirky, and the way that she doesn't really act that weird just makes it not work for me.
It is so over, I said it first!
It's like they just cast the first person that showed up to the audition, plus she looks almost exactly like Emma Stone, which I found distracting, but that's not really her fault I guess. To be honest, I actually don't mind the actress, and I think she does okay with what she was given. Like you can tell she was really trying in some of these scenes to the point that it just stands out. I just think that she was miscast in a role that Elizabeth Marmer was perfectly cast in, making the gulf in their performance seem much greater than it may actually be. As for some small specific comments about certain things in the pilot that I haven't mentioned up to this point, I really hate Mark's hair in the bathroom drinking scene. Your hair just doesn't get like that by itself, it's so unnaturally ruffled up in a way that comes across as tacky and goofy. That may not sound like a big deal, but little things like this really do go a long way in making your characters relatable. If you make him come across as a real person, we will view him as a real person, but if you over-exaggerate his appearance and behaviour in a way that comes across as forced, all we'll see him as is a cheap, cartoonified shell of the Mark Corrigan character. I don't think Awesome, this Jeremy's version of So Futile, is funny at all. There's no Jeremy screaming or saying his wannabe deep lyrics, it's just him saying awesome over a repetitive loop. It's just not very memorable or interesting like the British version. The original Jeremy's So Futile, while obviously amateur, does actually sound like a lot of late 90s rave and hardcore music from the UK, so you do buy that it's a serious attempt at a track. This Jeremy's Awesome, on the other hand, has none of that, and it feels like something made for a cheap gag rather than something that plays into an integral part of our character's personality. There's more I could say about this pilot, but I feel like the best way to get a feel for it is just to watch it yourself if you haven't already. There's only so many ways I can say it just wasn't funny and this thing just really doesn't work before it gets too repetitive. I think everyone watching probably has already gotten the point anyway, that this pilot is a complete failure with almost no redeeming qualities. As I said at the start of the video, the whole pilot has been uploaded to YouTube so you can watch it yourself and see if you agree with my criticisms of it. My question to those of you that have seen it is, are there any aspects of this show that you thought were not that bad? Obviously this version doesn't hold a candle to the original, but maybe there were some things in it that appealed to some people. For example, a lot of the problems that I have with it may not be as prevalent to those that are more accustomed to an American style of comedy or American comedy tropes.
People love that kind of stuff.
So yes, that was my video on the American Peep Show pilot, something that, after making this video, I never want to watch again.